Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Elizabeth Black. I'm a reader in Artificial Intelligence in the Department of Informatics at King's College London, and I'm co-director of the UKRI Centre for Doctoral Training in Safe and Trusted AI. Let me start by saying how grateful I am for the invitation to speak here today. So as I'll discuss in this talk, I really think it's vital that we build kind of stronger interdisciplinary links if we're to really ensure that the AI technologies that we develop are truly beneficial for society. So I'm very sorry that I can't be there in person, but I really hope that this talk might spark opportunities for more interdisciplinary dialogue about how AI techniques can be harnessed in a way that really respects and promotes societal values. So please do contact me by email if you have any questions or if this talk kind of sparks any ideas that you'd like to discuss any further. A lot of my talk today is about really kind of providing the context within which we should be thinking about AI and complaint handling. I'm going to talk about what we mean by AI, about some different types of AI, about some of the challenges faced by AI, and about the kind of recent kind of drive to make sure that AI is really the AI systems are really kind of safe, trustworthy, and ethical. I'll then talk a little bit more specifically about AI in complaint handling. I'm going to give my particular view of what is needed to ensure that the application of AI to complaint handling upholds values such as fairness, trust, and accountability. And finally, I'll finish with a very brief introduction to the particular research area that I mainly focus on, which is computational argumentation. This is a sub-area of AI. And I'm going to talk about the benefits of this for domains such as complaint handling. Let me start then by talking about what we mean by AI. So this definition here was coined by the European Commission's high-level expert group on artificial intelligence. So an AI system, given a complex goal, acts in the physical or digital dimension by perceiving its environment through data acquisition, interpreting the collected structured or unstructured data, reasoning on the knowledge or processing the information derived from this data, and deciding the best actions to take to achieve its given goal. AI systems can either use symbolic rules or can learn a numeric model. Okay, so what are the key points here? So an AI system is embedded in an environment where this environment might be digital, such as the internet, or physical, such as when we have a physical robot embedded in the real world. The AI has sensors through which it gathers information or percepts about the environment, and it has some way of performing actions on its environment. Internally, the AI system has some mechanism for reasoning with or processing the input it receives from its sensors in order to be able to decide which action it should perform on the environment in order to help it achieve its goal. Now, one important point that I want to draw out here, that I'll talk about more through this talk, is that these AI systems, when deciding what they should do, they can these AI systems, when deciding what they should do based on the input they receive, they can either use a symbolic representation of knowledge about the world in order to reason explicitly with that input, or they can apply a numeric model to the input that they receive. This is an important distinction which is often overlooked when AI is discussed in the media. Okay, so recent hype around AI is primarily focused on the kind of numeric model approach to processing data input, where these numeric models are learned through techniques such as deep learning. Okay, but it's now well recognized that these approaches come with significant challenges around the transparency and explainability of their results, and that these approaches learn to replicate any biases in the input or the environment that they learn from. So these are concerns with these approaches, but this is only one part of AI, right? So symbolic reasoning-based approaches where the AI has an explicit representation of knowledge and reasons explicitly with the knowledge that it has. These symbolic reasoning-based approaches have the potential to address some of these concerns, since they provide an explicit and interpretable model of the knowledge and their reasoning procedures. So just to give you a bit more of a feel for the breadth of AI, this is a list of the research areas covered at the largest international AI conference last year. So you can see it includes these two different decision-making approaches I've just discussed. So machine learning, where the AI learns a mathematical model to apply to its input, and knowledge representation and reasoning, where the AI has an explicit representation of knowledge about the world and uses this to reason explicitly about what to do given its input. But there's also a broad range of other areas in which AI research is focused. So, for example, computer vision and natural language processing. This is about how to understand complex inputs from the environment and actually often applies machine learning techniques in these areas. Agents and multi-agent systems research. This considers how groups of AI systems that are self-interested can find ways of working effectively together, as they often need to do in order to achieve their own individual goals. Humans and AI research, this is about considering how we can build more human-centric AI systems and so on. So from reading about AI in the press, it's easy to get the impression that AI is machine learning. And I just want to highlight that's not the case, right? Machine learning is an important and exciting area of AI, but AI is much more than only machine learning. Let's look then at a couple of quite different example applications of AI. So the first of these, I imagine some of you will be familiar with, this is Alphago. So this is developed by Google's DeepMind, and this Alphago system, it's an AI system that's capable of beating the human Go world champions. And this is a massive achievement for AI, right? Go is regarded as one of the most challenging kind of classical games for AI because it's hugely complex. So to play at a professional standard involves many different layers of strategical thinking. There are something like 10 to the 170 different possible board configurations for Go. So that's 1 followed by 170 zeros, different ways that the boards can appear in a game of Go, which is in fact more than the number of atoms in the universe. So what this means is it's very hard, it's impossible for an AI system to work out what to do by simulating all the possible moves because there's too many of them, right? So instead, as you might know, Alphago uses what's known as deep learning techniques. So it learnt by playing thousands and thousands of games against human players, against itself. And then according to the outcomes of the moves that it makes in these games, where it's learning how to play well, it adjusts its underlying mathematical model so as to improve its outcome over time. So this is really exciting, right? This AlphaGo learnt some really quite subtle and creative strategies to play, and it's rightly achieved a lot of media attention. This is another example application of an AI system that I guess you are less likely to be familiar with. So this is a tool that was developed by Alice Toniolo and colleagues, and the aim of this tool is to support a group of humans in reasoning effectively and collaboratively about some evidence that they have. So this particular example is about trying to understand the cause of a spate of illnesses in a particular area and whether these illnesses were caused by contamination to the water supply or not. So in contrast to AlphaGo, which uses these machine learning, deep learning techniques, here we have a symbolic AI approach, right? So here we have an explicit representation, or the AI system has an explicit representation of the knowledge about the evidence available and how this evidence interacts and the environment. So this tool interacts with a group of human users to elicit the relevant knowledge and reason appropriately with it. Because it uses this explicit symbolic representation of the knowledge, and because the reasoning techniques it applies employ the same dialectical principles that humans apply in argumentative reasoning and debate, this means that the humans that are engaging with the tool are able to understand the AI system's reasoning and are able to understand the reasons behind the decisions that the system makes. And it also means that the humans can engage with the AI system in some kind of joint reasoning. Now, this isn't the case for data-driven machine learning approaches such as AlphaGo. So there's a lot of hype at the moment around things like deep learning. And it's true that the recent boom in available data and processing power has led to some really amazing achievements in the area of deep learning. So AlphaGo, but also in like natural language processing, this kind of things. But we do also need to be aware of the dangers of these data-driven approaches and should not neglect these symbolic areas of AI, such as seen in this example here. Let me just take a moment to talk through some of the challenges that we face with these data-driven models of AI, whose decision-making is captured by mathematical functions. So a canonical example of this is deep learning. So in deep learning, we essentially have an enormous network of neurons arranged in layers. That's what you see in the top left of this slide here. So we have this big network. Input from the environment is fed into the left-hand side of the network, and it propagates forward from left to right. So each node in the network, we have a mathematical function that is applied to determine what the output of that node should be based on the inputs it receives from the previous layer. Okay? So information propagates through kind of node by node from left to right in this network with these mathematical functions determining what the output will be at each node. And then when the information eventually reaches the layer on the far right-hand side, we have our output. So in order to learn how to provide a good output, a network like this needs to be trained on lots and lots of examples. Okay, so during training, for each example it sees, depending on the quality of the output it produces, the network kind of adjusts itself, it adjusts the weights or the importance associated with each of the individual neurons so as to improve the output that it produces. And if you train a network like this on enough diverse examples, you should see that the network is then kind of able to learn how to perform well so that it can produce accurate outputs even on examples that it's never seen before. So this is really exciting, right? And there's been lots of exciting achievements. So yeah, as I mentioned, things like natural language processing and image processing, but there are some key challenges with this that are well recognized in academic field of AI. So first of all, these techniques are not interpretable. Okay, so they can't explain their reasoning or decision making to a user. So the mathematical function represented by a network like this is so complex it isn't meaningful to interpret it or to relate it back to features from the environment in any kind of understandable way. Secondly, if there are any biases present in the data that the network is trained on, the network's going to learn to replicate those biases, right? So, for example, Amazon were looking at developing a tool that would help them automate their recruitment process. So they trained this tool on previous recruitment data, and what they saw was that the tool had a massive bias towards recruiting men because men massively dominate the tech sector, right? So it was replicating the biases that we see in the real world. And then thirdly, these tools cannot learn things that they haven't seen in the data that they've come across, right? So for example, what we see with many facial recognition tools is that these facial recognition tools are much better at recognizing white men than they are, say, at recognizing women of color. And the reason for this is that these tools have been trained on data sets that are hugely dominated by images of white men. And so that is what the tools are optimized to recognize. So clearly these challenges pose a potential threat to human values such as fairness, transparency and trust. And this is widely recognized now, and there's been a big shift of focus towards trying to guard against these threats. There are two sides to the response to this threat. So on kind of one hand, we've got lots of new legislations and guidance coming in around the applications of AI. And on the other side, there's now much more emphasis on the development of technological solutions to these challenges. So, for example, looking to see how we can combine both data-driven and symbolic AI approaches to take advantages of the strengths of each of these. So just to talk a little bit about the legislative kind of response to this. So we've seen recognition of potential dangers of AI in much recent legislation. So I'm sure you'll know about the GDPR and how it talks about the data subject having the right to obtain an explanation of the decision that's been reached. So, for example, if we're denied a loan, the organisation needs to be able to provide a meaningful explanation of why we've been denied that loan. The EU's AI Act talks about classifying AI systems according to the level of risk that they pose and considers AI systems along three different dimensions, so that they should be lawful, ethical and technically robust. And there are many, many other sets of guidelines or principles that have been developed for AI, particularly in the last 5 to 10 years. So a recent survey found 84 distinct examples of these coming from a range of different organisations, including commercial organisations, governmental organisations, professional standards bodies, academic organisations, and so on. There's been really a lot of discussion about the principles that AI systems ought to uphold. So things such as transparency, justice and fairness, non-maleficence and responsibility. And then the other side to this is then how technically do we make sure that our AI systems embody these principles. And this is the focus of our Centre for Doctoral Training in Safe and Trusted AI. So we're training PhD students in how to develop AI systems that are both safe, meaning we can have some guarantees about their behaviour, and trustworthy, meaning that a user can understand and have confidence in the decisions and the reasoning that the system takes. So to give you just some very brief examples of the areas of research our students focus on, one of our students is looking at how different fairness metrics can be applied to different machine learning techniques, and the unexpected long-term impacts we see for optimizing for these different fairness metrics. And another of our students is looking at how an AI system can engage a human in dialogue so as to understand which values that human finds to be particularly important, and then how the AI system can then adjust its behaviour to better match or uphold the values that its human user find to be the most important. So these are just some very brief examples of the kind of huge amount of research that's now going on to try to ensure that we achieve the potential of AI without causing any unintended harms either to individuals or to society. And the work that's going on in our Centre for Doctoral Training is just one part of this. There's much emphasis now within the field of AI and more broadly on these kind of areas. So there's been really a massive shift of focus in recent years towards this aim and lots of exciting progress in this area. So while it's absolutely right that we need to take care that AI is applied cautiously and responsibly, we should also recognise the potential benefits that AI can bring us and try to work collectively towards these. So I want to talk now more specifically about AI and complaint handling. And there are two sides to this, right? So on the one hand, of course, as AI is increasingly deployed and employed in ways that can really significantly impact on people's lives, this means that there will be more complaints related to the application of AI, and these need to be handled. And the other side of this is on the application of AI to complaint handling. So can we use AI techniques to improve the complaint handling process? And we're already starting to see things like AI-enabled customer service chatbots, but I think there's much greater potential for AI to help humans reason more effectively about complaints, to make better decisions, to reduce the costs to all parties, so be these financial or emotional kind of costs, to keep better record of the decisions made and the impacts of these decisions, and to help us understand how improvements can be made to the system. However, we absolutely have to take care that any such AI systems really uphold and promote societal values such as fairness, transparency, trust, and so on. And I'm going to talk a little bit now about my view of what I think is really important for this. So first of all, we need really genuine interdisciplinary collaboration. So for example, between AI experts, social scientists, legal experts, so on. And we need really meaningful involvement of stakeholders in the research and innovation process in a way that's not just an afterthought, but kind of properly baked in and a genuine part of the process. And I don't think we should underestimate kind of how difficult this is and the kind of shift that it implies for the kind of research processes that we're used to. So this is the first thing I think we need to, and people are definitely starting to pay much more attention to. Secondly, the AI systems that we develop need to work together with humans, right, in deep and meaningful ways. So I do not believe that we should be developing AI systems that simply kind of go off and do their thing and output a decision. Rather, we want to develop AI systems that can support human reasoning or that can engage humans in joint reasoning where both the AI and the human are inputting into the decision-making process. If we are applying machine learning techniques to learn from data, we need to be very careful that we understand fully the shortcomings of the approach and of the data that the AI is learning from, and we need to understand any implications of this. And my view is that if we are to engage AI in helping complainants and organisations to reason about their complaints, where values of trust, fairness, justice, accountability are really key, then we have to have an explicit and interpretable representation of the underlying knowledge and the reasoning process that's being applied, so that we can inspect and audit this. And finally, we need a way then of being able to review and modify the explicit reasoning model as appropriate. So these are the key considerations that I think are important for the application of AI to complaint handling. So I want to introduce you now to a particular area of AI that has potential for helping us to address some of these challenges, and that's the area of computational argumentation, which is the area of AI that my research mainly focuses on. So computational argumentation is about providing AI systems with the capabilities to reason with arguments really in the same way that humans do. It's a symbolic AI technique where knowledge is explicitly represented, typically using logic symbols. And as we're used to in human argumentation, arguments in computational argumentation have a claim and some justification for this claim, and arguments can attack or contradict one another. So given a collection of arguments and attacks between them, computational argumentation provides a method for determining which arguments it is rational to accept based on intuitive dialectical principles that are familiar to us from human argumentative reasoning and debate. In addition to providing AI with a means to reason in a way that's intuitive and understandable to humans, computational argumentation provides a principled way of structuring exchanges of arguments and joint or distributed reasoning about these. So what does this mean? Well, AI reasoning and decision-making using computational argumentation is transparent and explainable and understandable to human users. Computational argumentation can be used to underpin dialogues between humans and AI. So, for example, to allow the AI and the humans to jointly reason about some decision, or to allow a human to question the reasons behind a particular decision that the AI system has made, and perhaps challenge these reasons. So fundamentally, computational argumentation is well suited to supporting human dialogue and reasoning, and so can be used to enhance and improve human decision making. And for these reasons, I believe computational argumentation is well suited to supporting the domain of complaint handling. Okay, so thank you. That's all I've got time for, I'm afraid. I hope this talk has been useful for you all. I hope it's given you a bit of a better understanding of AI, the potential challenges and benefits of AI. And I hope it's given you some ideas about how AI techniques such as computational argumentation can be beneficial in supporting the complaint resolution process. Again, I'm really sorry I wasn't able to join you in person. Please do get in touch with me if you have any questions, or if this talk has sparked any ideas that you'd like to discuss further. I'd be really happy to hear from you. So thank you again, and I really hope you enjoyed the rest of your conference. Thank you.